The desert never ceases to amaze me. I mean, when you look around, it's just a whole bunch of rocks. But when we turn this way, there's what's known as the giant rock. And this rock has been the focal point for Native American communities and UFO enthusiasts. And there was a man who actually lived underneath this rock and he blew himself up. Now, this is kind of a crazy story and we have a lot to unpack, but it's all centered around this one big boulder. So before we get into the story about the people that lived out here, we need to talk about the special place on the earth that this rock resides. So from a geological perspective, this rock is huge. It's comprised of thousands of pounds of granite. It's over 7 stories high, and it covers a base of around 6,000 square feet. And when you're standing next to it, you could just feel its presence. It's so big and so tall, and it just towers over anything else in the area. This is somewhere between Joshua Tree National Park and the Mojave Desert. That's not really that special. But what is special is that this is an energy vortex. Now, what's an energy vortex? So it's apparently a place where energy is amplified. And whether you believe in all this energy stuff or you think it's woo-woo, it is a weird coincidence that there are these different places on Earth where the energy is amplified, and it's places where ancient spiritual temples were built, like the Machu Picchu in Peru, Stonehenge in England, and even the Great Pyramids of Giza. Kind of a weird coincidence. But the giant rock is apparently at one of these energy vortexes. Before the 20th century, Native American communities would use this as a meeting place, and it was called the Great Stone, which represented the Great Spirit. And it makes sense. It's the largest freestanding object in the area. And that's probably what also drove Frank Kitzer here to use this as a place for his home. Kitzer built an apartment underneath the rock, and he used dynamite to blow it out. He had a ventilation shaft for air, he had a rainwater collection system, really engineered it nicely to be able to live underneath a boulder. Now, the unique thing about being in this location is that because of the granite, it never got super hot. So in the desert out here, it gets well into the hundreds. And in his apartment underneath the rock, it only got as high as 80 degrees. Now, Kitzer was a loner. He didn't live with anyone, but he did set it up so that people could visit him. There was an airstrip, he built a whole series of roads, and he even had like a little picnic area outside so people could come and visit. This is his apartment down here, or what's left of it. There's really not much down here. It's kind of just a hole. But Kitzer eventually became under an investigation by the FBI around the time that the US entered into World War II. Now, the authorities thought that he could potentially be a German spy because he had an interest in shortwave radio, and he lived out here by himself. And so when they came to investigate what was going on out here, there's actually kind of a mystery around what exactly happened, but Kitzer blew himself up underneath here. And that's where George Van Tassel comes into the story. He was an acquaintance of Kitzer's and used to come out here. And he felt something strange when he was around the giant rock. So after Kitzer's death, he leased the land to be able to operate the airport from the Bureau of Land Management. Now in the 50s, he started holding meditation sessions in what was once Kitzer's apartment, and he claimed to have received thought transference, which was basically telepathic communications from an alien race on Venus. He learned from these beings that our bodies are made of energy, kind of like a giant battery. And as we age, it's basically just the process of us losing that energy. So he devised a plan from talking with these aliens to build a structure that could harness static electricity from the air and bring it back into our bodies. And the machine that he decided to build is called the Integratron. It's a structure that's completely built with no metal, and it still exists today. So for 20 years, Van Tassel would hold big UFO conventions. There would just be thousands of chairs out here on this big flat area right in front of the giant rock. They would talk about UFOs, talk about extraterrestrials, but more importantly, he used these as kind of a crowdfunding source to be able to build the Integratron. Now, the Integratron was 90% complete, and Van Tassel was going to be the first person to experience this bolt of electricity to recharge his body. But then he died suddenly. And when he died, he lost the plans to the Integratron because they were all in his head. Now, Van Tassel's wife was always supportive of him, but after his death, she decided to move on. And the Integratron didn't really have an owner. There was talks of turning it into a disco, but eventually one group took it over and it became a sound bath meditation retreat center. And I've actually gone and done a sound bath here, and it's super relaxing. It's a really cool experience, but it would be interesting to know what would happen if Van Tassel actually finished the Integratron like he had planned in his head. Now the giant rock has basically just become Instagram famous. People come out here to take photos, to off-road, to shoot guns, light fireworks, and if you look around, all of the rocks are just covered in graffiti. The locals used to come out here and power wash and clean up all these rocks, and now it's just kind of left as is, and it's kind of just becoming a mess out here. So whether you believe in this idea of the energy vortexes or you think this is just a rock in the middle of the desert, you can't deny the fact that this is a place that draws people in. When you stand in the shadow, you can just feel the presence of a big being standing over you. Visiting places like this allow us to stretch our imagination and think about the what if. And we also get an opportunity to stand next to the giant rock and see if we actually feel something too.